Hello friends, this is Odds, and if you're familiar with me or my content, then you know that I spend most of my time playing Dead by Daylight and a few other games that I enjoy that all start with D for some reason. But the thing is, over the last 2 months, I've actually been working on a secret project. It has to do with this game, Meet Your Maker. It's an action 3D game where you beat the levels created by other players, or you can spend time creating your own levels for other people to beat, much like Mario Maker, but with controls that are a little bit more modern. And that's what I've been doing. I have been creating my own level. Just one. I have poured more than 100 hours, at this point I've lost count, into perfecting a single level. It's this one. It's called Union City. And if you want to try it yourself before I spoil it and break it down, please follow the instructions on screen and have a blast. So the point of Union City was to cram in as many dirty tricks as I could. As you can see, it's not one of those artistic, fancy levels. I'm not very good at that. But it's also not a tedious level with a bunch of mazes or a horribly annoying level with one room full of millions of traps. No. This is just a bunch of collections of little tricks here and there, ingenious uses of traps, and as many creative ways to kill raiders as I could find. And without patting myself on the back, I have to say that I think it came out pretty good. Many players tried to beat this and fail. Some succeeded, but only after hours sometimes of attempts. It's been a blast watching the replays, so I'm going to break down the entire level piece by piece, explain the mechanical layout of some of the traps and how you can copy them into your own bases for some really nice success, and also the psychological aspects that make some of them so deadly. And obviously throughout this whole thing we'll be seeing replays of people try to beat the level and sometimes fail in the most hilarious ways possible. I can't wait to show you. Let's get into it. Arriving at the map, the most prominent feature that stands out even more than the entrance of the level itself are these big 3 towers. I wanted people to pay attention to them and engage with them before going into the main level. And the first one is very close to the player, and it will be checked out by most players very quickly. And if they do, they'll find out that each of these towers holds one of the 3 Forsaken Tombs. The Forsaken Tombs are an optional side quest type of thing where you can break it and you get a bunch of nice materials. Most players appreciate finding these. So even though many people are a little bit scared and a little bit skeptical and they try to look for traps, the first tower is completely safe. I just wanted people to understand that each of these towers would have a little treasure next to them to set expectations so that we could backstab them later. So the first one is completely safe on the house, nothing to worry about. Please go on. Once they arrive at the second tower, they realize that this one doesn't have an outside facing door. Instead, they are instructed to go up top. While they do that, they will listen, if they pay attention, to the sounds that the Forsaken Tomb makes. And then they'll put 2 and 2 together, they realize that it's going to be the same as the previous one. If they have a quick peek through the corrosive lava cube at the top, they might even discern what looks like the Forsaken Tomb. But if they go down, they'll find out that this is not the real Forsaken Tomb. It's just a fake. It is a combination of decals and wall textures to make it look like one, and the real one is actually hidden behind a holographic fake cube below it. If raiders are a little bit careless and they go through the corrosive cube, which is pretty safe to do, they will trigger the holographic cube and then trigger a set of bolts that might spike them up and shoot and kill them from below. Even if they survive or somehow block these bolts coming up, bolts actually follow gravity in this game. So once they go all the way up, they will begin to fall down. And I've killed more than one player by making the bolts fall down after a little while to gravity and still catch them looting the Forsaken Tomb. Once they are done with this tower, they need to exit it. And if they have an arc barrier shield, they can actually shield through the lava cube and they'll be fine. But many players don't know how to get out of this without one. It's actually very difficult to get out of this if you don't know the precise timing. So many people just die trying to get out of this little chimney. If they manage it, or when they manage it, they'll typically go and check out the third one and they'll realize that it's sealed off and that this will probably open up later. This sets a certain expectation that will help us in the future. But let's get back to the entrance. Going to the entrance, we'll see that it's very unremarkable. It's just a little path down with some scratch marks to make sure that absolutely nobody misses it. And things suddenly get interesting when we arrive at the first turn. We have a set of 2 corrosive cubes. Remember, these are lava cubes that will kill you if you step on them, so you need to be a bit careful. And they have a mod to make them opaque, harder to see through. I don't know what it is about this corner, or what it is about the next room that it leads into, it for some reason really captures the Raiders' attention. Almost every single player, without exception, is so curious to see what is behind this threshold that they don't pay attention to the first real threat, which is this holographic cube to the right. This holographic cube to the right catches even the most patient and careful players. I think I've only seen maybe 1 or 2 people notice it before it triggers. Once the holographic cube is triggered and it dissipates, it at the same time triggers these entrance bombs, which is what I've called them. These bombs will immediately shoot up and go through the corrosive cubes that we set up. And at this point, most players will panic and try to go back. If they have a shield, they will use it and they'll typically survive. But if they don't have a shield, they will most likely get stuck in this tricky geometry because it's not easy to immediately grapple back, and they will die. This is such a successful first trap. I can barely contain my excitement when I share it with you. It catches so many people. It's not likely to work twice. It's the kind of thing that it kills you once and that's it, but it does kill you once very, very frequently. And this little corner, it's just so good at catching people that retreat. Very, very effective setup that you could copy in your own base right now, and it would probably add 1 kill on average. Obviously, surviving raiders that have already seen it or died to it will deal with it very quickly in the next time, and then they go into the next place, which is what I like to call the tight room. Now, this is very obvious if you're already a Meet Your Maker player, but in order to make a level that is beatable, you need to make a path that leads to the objective, which is the gen mat. If you make this path too tight, there's not an actual valid path for Harvey to travel, and the level is not actually legal. You can't publish this. But if you make it too wide, then you're giving too much space to the players for them to dodge and maneuver around any traps you might have. This room achieves the best of both worlds. It is technically a legal path. You can go through this, but it's also very, very tight and awkward to navigate. And we've made sure that the cubes at the end of the row are opaque so that it's actually hard to see what's coming ahead. Now, having corrosive cubes on your head is already dangerous. Some players, while navigating and being a bit clumsy, will, bump their head with the ceiling and die. But the more interesting aspect of this is that they let other traps go through them. They're not solid. So when the players try to dip their toes into this tight room and trigger some of the traps that are coming up, they will actually be killed through these lava cubes. As you can see, we have both bolts on the right and some bombs on the left, and they are both extremely effective at catching people that retreat. And it's actually really hard to retreat quickly. So once you trigger these, if you are unlucky enough to do that, you're in a bit of trouble. We also have a cannon back that will be constantly shooting bombs that will be very easy to die to if you retreat all the way to the back, and some nasty plasma sentinels that will harass you all the way to the entrance of this tight room. A few other traps help out to round out this spot, and then we reach the exit of the tight room. And as you can see here, we have a combination of an impaler and then a modded piston to be held up as much as possible, which will stop people trying to rush through. Through this piston, you will be hit by fire from this incinerator, and in a bit of an angle, we also have another incinerator with a warmonger, which will body block this tiny diagonal corridor, which is even thinner than a normal corridor. And notice also that the plasma sentinels are recycled. If for some reason you don't break them and you're rushing through, we take advantage of the fact that they work in 3 dimensions and 360 degrees around them to get you when you go around them. This is a very nice trick that makes you get most value out of your plasma sentinels, and I recommend you implement it. That being said, there is a way to get through this. If you rush through this, from my experience, most people rushing through this, especially if it's their first or second time, they will die. There's simply too many things. You get body block, you get shot by fire, the warmonger has a mod to make it immune to fire, so it's really, really difficult to rush through this. Players will typically take their time to break everything one by one, especially with their bolts on their guns, and they can make it through this. But for that type of player, we have a second trick to catch that particular type of players, and it's this little thing over here on the left, which I like to call the ammo bait. As you can see, it has a very nasty incinerator that is aiming at you in a very delicate position that you'll need to be in. And most people won't think twice. If they have a gun, they will shoot it and destroy it. Now, you might have noticed that right above it, we have an impaler. Some people don't notice it and they grapple onto it and they die to it. But most people will notice it because, let's be honest, it's quite obvious, and they'll shoot at it. And once they do, that's 2 pieces of ammo that they need to go and retrieve. So they won't think about it twice. They'll use their grappling to retrieve it, and then they'll get caught by this little bad boy. This is one of my proudest achievements. I don't know what it is about this angle, but it makes players very unlikely to actually notice it. And it's something that I would definitely copy and use again in another outpost if I could. It is so damn effective. Now, basically what happens here is that when they go through, they trigger the bolts. The bolts technically don't have an angle to kill the raider, but once we install the hunter mod, they do follow the raider perfectly to kill them in the landing spot at the end of this little corridor. So this is one of the most successful and cost-effective tricks that you can add onto your base. Once we are done with the stat room, one way or another, we follow a very simple corridor that leads us into what used to be the most evil place in this entire level by far. I used to call this the ammo pit room. Once you reach this room, you were greeted by an assortment of traps on multiple angles that spewed fire and plasma balls at you. Now, rushing forward was quite dangerous, and most players didn't do that. Their first instinct was typically to shoot at these traps. They didn't seem all that weird anyway, why wouldn't you? But this was a terrible mistake, because as soon as you wasted 1, 2, or all of your ammo on shooting these traps, that ammo was gone. It was impossible to retreat it. With this patented pattern that created this tight little window, the traps could target you, but you could not actually go through these holes. And you would see raiders try to get their ammo back to absolutely no avail. If they tried to go outside to try to find it, they would realize that I've actually used the natural bedrock formation of my level to my advantage, and I've encased the entire thing. It's completely sealed off. There's no way to get your ammo. It is literally impossible at this stage. They would lose their ammo, and then they would have to go through the rest of the level without any ammo, and they would inevitably die at one point or another. This was extremely evil, and I loved it, but at one point it got patched. They introduced a change that allowed raiders to be a little bit skinnier, and now suddenly they could go through the hole. So since this had no reason to be anymore, I decided to rebrand and redesign this room into a more conventional trap room. Now, the first thing we see in the renewed ammo pit room is a little familiar setup of this incinerator. If we look at the right, we see that there are some plasma sentinels and some nasty looking things. So it's very natural for players to want to destroy the incinerator. That's a given. And then grapple onto it. And what they'll find once they do is that there are some bombs here that can kill you. If you don't pay attention, you won't realize that you have a fake floor on your feet that you will fall into and die to very, very easily. And even if you hide in this little gap, the plasma ball residue will actually kill you through the wall. So you're not safe in here at all. And the flamethrower incinerator below your feet here can also trigger if you find cover in this other corner. So it's pretty effective. And then we have some other traps around here to make it a little bit harder for people to rush through. At the end of this diagonal downwards facing corridor, we have yet another incinerator that people will likely break from a distance. And at the base of it, we have yet another combination of incinerator, as well as a piston and a warmonger with plating to make it very difficult for anyone running through to actually make it. If they're stuck at this moment for even a second, they will most likely die because they've triggered some bombs that many people miss. These bombs are behind a holographic cube, and they follow a very simple setup that is very popular in the Meteor Maker community because it works like a charm. I call these the displacement bombs, and the way they work is that when they are triggered, some of them will fall down vertically onto the player that triggers them, and the other ones will be redirected through an alternative duct that you can make land ahead or behind. In my first iteration of this level, I made them fall ahead into the next corridor, And this got some people. But then I realized that most players actually fall back into known territory. So I turned it around and I made it so that these bombs now fall backwards. Notice that they go through a corrosive cube that is opaque. So it's very difficult for players to realize what the hell happened. If some of them don't pay attention, they might die multiple times to this type of bomb without having any idea what actually killed them. They might think that it was just one bomb that was lucky, when in reality, this is a very consistent setup. Either way, if they are careful or lucky, they will survive all of this, and then they'll find themselves going through yet another corridor. At this point, notice that there is a big hole on the ceiling that makes it look like there's going to be another set of bombs. It's actually a really, really good idea to constantly use misdirection and use fake ceilings to completely overwhelm raiders. If they constantly look for traps, they will be less likely to notice when you actually use alternative ways to trick them. And there's absolutely no trap up there. The point of this is just to distract them of the fact that there is actually an impaler at their feet. I think I've only killed one person with this, but I'm still proud of it. I still like it. I think it's kind of cute. And if they keep going forward, now they'll arrive at perhaps the most stacked part of the entire map, the big trap room. Let's break it down. Even though I just referred to this as a big room, in reality, it is a fairly tight place. It has many traps of different types that cover almost every angle. So players that choose the option of going through this and rushing through this room will often be simply overwhelmed by how many different things are aiming to kill you. We also find yet more pistons with incinerators in diagonal corners, which are really difficult to dodge effectively. And notice that one of the bunkered cannonbacks actually has a little space that allows him to look behind him. This means that if you ignore him and you keep pressing forward, he can still aim at you and shoot you in the back, which can get you killed. So running through this room seems like a bad idea. But what about holding back? What about being patient and dealing with each element one by one? That is sometimes just as dangerous. The first safety spot that players will typically hover around and will rest at is this corner right here. You get to peek into the room a little bit, maybe get targeted by the cannonbacks that see you, but ultimately this doesn't seem like you're in any real danger. But oh my god, you are in real danger, because this little shaped corner here is an absolute magnet for the cannonbacks' balls. They often bounce back into the safe corridor behind this, and you will more often than not be caught here if your reaction times are a little bit clumsy. You will need to be very, very smart in how you deal with the cannonbacks, because if you linger here, you will often die. Once people have died here or have dealt with the cannonbacks, the next natural place for them to feel safe at is a little bit further behind this corrosive cube that is opaque. Now, the corrosive cube doesn't really protect you from anything, but it does feel like a wall. So people will approach this place trying to find some kind of angle to look into the room and see further into it. And they might not realize that their footing is actually not safe here. These are holographic cubes that will immediately collapse upon your steps. If you fall and your reaction times are bad, you will die to the bolt that triggers. Straight up. But even if your reaction times are fast and you jump out of the way, this bolt has the Hunter mod, which will make the bolts themselves hone onto you and go through the corrosive cube and kill you, which gets a lot of players. If you somehow survive these two, and you try to use this as a way to get into the room, you'll notice that it doesn't provide any real advantage, so this cannot be cheesed as a shortcut. So that's the second spot. Now, when you step into the room itself, there are a lot of things that are going to try to kill you. If you have already dealt with the cannonbacks, you still need to be very careful about the incinerators, as well as the plasma sentinels. It's very difficult to choose which one to target here, and many people at this point will be confident in just running into the room and maybe taking the place where the cannonbacks were laying. But here you are still vulnerable to certain traps that are not immediately visible, so trying to find a safe spot in this room is quite dangerous. The moment you set foot on this particular square, you will also be in big trouble. You will trigger at least 3 things going on at once. The first and main one is another set of displaced bombs. Just like we explained earlier, some of these fall directly down into the room, and this can kill some players. And the other set of bombs actually are sent back, and they fall again on that first spot of safety, and much like the cannonback bombs, they bounce back into the corridor that you came from, which kills a lot of people. This is such a dirty, effective trap, and it's again concealed by a corrosive cube with opaqueness that makes lots of players die to this and not realize what happened. There are a lot of players that think that these were just some random bombs. They don't realize that, yes, no, this is consistently made to kill you here. So that's one of the things that triggers once you are here. If you go into this spot again and look to the right, you will also notice that you trigger another holo cube that shoots bolts. Now, these bolts are not really meant to kill you. If they kill you, that's fantastic. The real aim of these bolts is to shoot through this other corrosive cube that's also opaque, and when they do that, they will destroy a holographic cube that is behind it. This is completely off the view of the player, and once this holo cube has been destroyed, now a hornet will be freed, and this hornet will fly up, follow a certain path, kill itself with a corrosive cube, fall through yet another opaque corrosive cube, and explode on this third spot. This third spot is the safest place where people feel once they've dealt with the initial traps of the room. It is such a random thing that this hornet comes with a deadman switch self-explosion on kill that it catches a lot of people off guard. There was this one player who died to a trap, respawned with a phoenix spot, and then got blown up immediately. And there's also a lot of co-op players that get each other killed or both die here. And you can do this in your bases with any other creative path you want. Find a spot where people wait, where people shoot at things, where they feel safe, and have a hornet blow up once they fall on top of them. It is absolutely hilarious. Now, there are a few more elements in this room to make it a little bit harder to get through, but if you somehow do, we're now at the final stretch. In this final stretch, you will almost inevitably really trigger a holographic cube that will again release an enemy. This is a warmonger with the flame walker application so that it doesn't die to the flamethrower incinerator above you. And then a little bit ahead, you also have the wombo combo of another warmonger with a hornet above it. And these two kind of create a shield that is really difficult to penetrate. It's a little bit difficult to rush through them. Again, the hornet has the deadman switch mod that will make it explode if it dies. And depending on how you rush this, you might actually make the bolts in this final corridor kill the hornet. And if that happens, the hornet itself will explode, which might fall down onto your feet. So there's quite a few ways to die here if you're not careful. And for people that rush it, I have one final gift that I actually saw one player. This was one of the later additions to this level. There is a simple piston at the end of this corridor past a little out of view curve. This piston, unlike other traps, doesn't make much noise if you run into it quickly, which you often will, which means that it's very silent and it's very likely to make the noise and kill you on the spot. And for you to die here at the very last bit is so mean. So that's just a little surprise that at least one person has died to, and I imagine more would if I added this early. Anyway, right after that, we've reached the actual end of the level. If we peek around this corner, we will notice the gen mat, which is the thing that we need to capture in order to beat it. And before it, we have this fun looking impaler that is honestly not gonna fool anyone. And next to it, there's a fun little cube. And when we shoot it, it explodes for some reason. Why is this here? What does it do? Don't think about it too much. Anyway, we grab the gem mat, and then if we go forward, we realize that, hey, we're actually inside the third tower, the one that we saw earlier. So we don't have to go all the way back. We've already beaten the level, right? There's one final surprise. Let's just see it from one of our players' perspectives. Yep, so it's another suicide setup, and this one is my favorite. So the impaler has a self-destruct that somehow goes through this orange solid cube and destroys a holographic cube. This holo cube was blocking a hornet. Once it's no longer blocking it, the hornet goes all the way up and then drops through the chimney and falls and explodes right on top of any suspecting person that is gazing from this spot. It's so funny. It's just so funny. It makes me feel so good when someone has beaten the whole level only to die at this final stage. Some people are very careful about it, or they are just a bit lucky because the timing is a bit inconsistent and they survive it. And if they do further troubles, they get the Forsaken Tomb and they get to escape this level. Now, it's been a joy working on this. I've seen people sometimes spend 2 hours. I've seen someone die 50 times and beat it in the end. It's been really fun going through the replays, and hopefully you guys had fun, you know, seeing all these Machiavellian things into motion. At any rate, I will be leaving the information on this level if you want to try it yourself still. And I will also make a different level that is only a showcase of some of the tricks used here, so that you can go and see it for yourself and copy them if you want to make your own level with some inspiration from this base. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one if you enjoy this kind of content.